just said the meeting is being recorded, is that right?
Yes, correct.
So I thought, talking about a boys' choir and its birth and its progress over the 30 years that I was associated with might be of interest, perhaps more on the light-hearted side of it rather than anything too serious about the choir. But first I thought, well, we should start off with a little music of the boys singing. So I hope you can hear this.
It's still, there's no movement. Yeah, I've come away, but there's still my picture on the screen.
Could you hear that and see the photo?
A bit distorted, but it was still
Yes.
beautiful.
Yes, well, it'll be distorted coming through there, and also it's not a particularly new recording.
Oh,
How did we come to have a boys' choir in Auckland, New Zealand? 1969, I was a young, enthusiastic teacher with a passion for music, and the Department of Education approached me one day and said, the Lions Club of Auckland have a member in it, an elderly gentleman, who is absolutely nuts on the Vienna Boys Choir. And he wants the Vienna Boys Choir of New Zealand. Well, there was no show of getting that, but there was no reason not to try and have a boys' choir. So the education department more or less said, please, to get this man off our back, would you be interested in starting a boys' choir? So I jumped at the chance. And I chose a friend of mine who was a very, very talented accompanist and teacher. And with the blessing of the Lions Club and the help of what was then the Department of Education, we advertised the fact that we were starting a boys' choir in Auckland, New Zealand, and that we would be auditioning interested boys on Saturday mornings. Well, in the end, we ended up by auditioning, probably over the course of a few weeks, nearly 300 boys, which was very heartening, because a skeptic had said to me when I was talking to him about this project, he said, it will never work. You'll never get a boys' choir in Auckland. The climate and everything is against you. We're outdoor people. The boys are all for sport and sailing, and you'll never get any of them interested. Now, I'd just like to say here now, the choir celebrated its 50th anniversary last year, so I was very glad to prove that gentleman wrong. Having auditioned nearly 300 boys, we picked 75 of the most likely lads. These were ones not only that had a good voice, but we sensed were musical, passed some simple ear tests, and above all, seemed to be focused and keen on the idea. So over the next year, we rehearsed. Now, we could only rehearse once a week because these boys came from all corners of Auckland. So it was impossible to get them together more than once a week for a couple of hours. And that's always been the limitation of the choir, unlike the choirs, the cathedral choirs in England and other places where they rehearse every day, at least once. We were limited to the once a week. So you spent half your time going over what you'd done the week before you could get into anything new. However, that didn't stop our enthusiasm. After a year working with those 75 boys, we had got it down to a choir of 40, which we believed was a good size for a concert choir. And we delivered our first public concert in St Matthew's in the city. And the critic, and some of you may remember LCMS Saunders, the critic of the New Zealand Herald, he came and reviewed the concert. And we were in much fear and trepidation and didn't know how we would be received. But his headline was, "This choir sings with beauty and understanding." And for me, that was the launching pad to continue and keep going.
Neil, could I just ask a question, please?
Yes.
What age group are we talking about here?
Right, we're talking about boys with treble voices. So the age range would have been from 8 to 13. Getting up towards 13, of course, the voice is going to start changing. And that's one of the great drawbacks of running a choir like this. You not only rehearse a group to a fine standard, have them singing, and then you lose half of them because they go off quite naturally as their voice changes. So I'd say the average age of the boy in the choir at that stage would have been about 10, I think. I didn't take them before 8 because the discipline of the choir, was quite concentrated. And I think, boys under that age, it would have been a bit hard. And I didn't want a boy to start and have a horrible experience and be put off music for the rest of his life, although I'm sure there were a few that happened to. So we rehearsed once a week, and more boys applied, and a few left, and so forth. What was our repertoire going to be? Well, the repertoire has ended up a mixture of sacred music, art songs, folk songs, songs from shows. But while I was there, no pop. Because I used to say, you've got a diet of pop all the time, surrounding you, you're singing it all the time. No, we're not into that. Surprisingly, some of the best music the boys took to was sacred music, because there's so much wonderful sacred music that, of course, was written in past centuries for boys' voices. So often when it came to the end of a rehearsal, I'd say, right, what shall we sing? What's your favourite? 8 or 9 times out of 10, it would be a sacred number. It always amazed me. I thought they'd want one of their folk songs or something, but that's the way it was. So as the choir developed, we set out a policy of commissioning New Zealand composers and then overseas composers to write for the choir. And that was very thrilling to be able to sing some original pieces by composers like Rondello and Douglas Muse and David Hamilton here in New Zealand, and later on some composers in the UK and America. It was wonderful. We had a summer camp every year for 1 week at Bucklands Beach, where we all had a marvellous time, and that was a great time for bonding the boys together and the mums and dads and helpers and committee. And it was a good mixture of very hard concentrated work and then lots of fun off to the beach or playing games, putting on shows in the evening and inviting local people to come and hear an informal concert. And I'll never forget, once we shared the facility out there at Eastern Beach with an elderly group. I don't know whether but anyway, it was an elderly group. And we came down to breakfast one day to find them all sitting there, and they'd all stuffed their napkins in their ears and were sitting there. And the leader explained to me, it wasn't just singing that we're doing this, it's the terrible noise afterwards when you come in to have lunch. So, of course, the boys couldn't stop at that. And so the next time everyone came to dinner, there were the boys sitting with napkins stuffed in their ears, which the elderly group appreciated and thought was quite funny. As we went on, we fortunately could establish quite a name with other leading musical groups like the Auckland Choral Society, the Dorian Singers, the Auckland Philharmonic Orchestra, and the NZSO Symphony Orchestra on 2 occasions asked the boys to be one in the chorus part for Mahler's Third Symphony, and the other one was a big thrill when they had an overseas conductor from Britain to conduct Benjamin Britten's War Requiem. It was an amazing experience for the boys. Also local and school groups we combined with and did things. We visited rest homes, hospitals, and we went into local festivals and competitions. One of our biggest thrills was that we took part in the Liverpool Oratorio by John McCarthy. That was the New Zealand premiere for that, and also for Bernstein's Mass. All wonderful experience for the boys to work with professional musicians. We became an incorporated society, had our own board and officers and parents' committees. And the parents were wonderful. Endless cake stalls, fundraising, working out what sort of uniform we were going to have. Uniform changed 3 or 4 times during my time. And that was another problem. Not only did your boy fit out a boy, but 3 months later he'd grown out of it. His trousers were up to his knees and so forth. So that was always a bit of a problem, but great fun. In 1975, I was fortunate enough to be awarded a Queen Elizabeth Arts Council scholarship, and I went to England to study the training of boys' voices. My school very kindly gave me leave of absence, and I was stationed at Gloucester Cathedral as my basis and moved around 5 other cathedrals observing how the boys were so well trained. That was an amazing experience for me. A bit more hair raising for my wife with a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, but she was marvelous. And I learned much from that experience and go back when I can, at the moment, when I can, to some of those places and renew the friendships I made there. Now, one of our main things that we ended up by doing, because it's very important to give boys incentives and things to work for all the time. And so we took up to touring, and there wouldn't be many places in New Zealand we haven't toured to. I tell you, we've been to great small places all around New Zealand. And of course, many of the small places is where you got the best reception. They look forward to having somebody in town doing something which was a bit different. And sometimes you'd arrive in a town and think, oh, will anybody be interested in coming, hearing a boys' choir sing? And lo and behold, we'd have a packed hall. And then we'd go to a big centre and there wouldn't be nearly so much interest. So it was very interesting, and we had some wonderful times touring. And I'll tell you in a moment some of the hilarious things that have happened on tours. We went to Australia 3 times during my tenure. First was in 1976 when Australia used to have a big youth festival, music festival, and asked choirs and orchestras from all over the world to descend upon Melbourne. And so we were invited. And we went with an orchestral group from King's College, called the Stringers, the King's Stringers, and had a wonderful week in Melbourne, presenting concerts and listening to other great young people doing some wonderful things in music. For that tour, I asked Dr. Douglas Muse, who was then Professor of Composition at Auckland University and a great supporter of the Boys Choir. I asked him, would he do a rather cheeky version of Waltzing Matilda that we could take and sock it to the Aussies. And he came up, he had a most marvelous sense of humor and he could put it into music so cleverly. So he did. And we took this version of Waltzing Matilda, which halfway through went into a very schmaltzy waltz and then back into being sensible. And at the end, as the choir repeated the words, "You'll never catch me alive, you'll never catch me, you'll never catch me," one of the smallest choir boys, had to run down the centre aisle of the hall or church, and I had to chase after him, do a fireman's lift on him and bring him back while the choir was still singing. So it was always a challenge for me to look for the smallest and lightest boy in the choir. And we did that. Well, the first time we did it at, which was at the major formal concert in the Melbourne Town Hall. And the choir before us was a Japanese choir. And they sang beautifully. And then they finished off by singing Waltzing Matilda, very respectfully, very solemnly, very much like a hymn, not a glimmer of a smile, very respectful, as you could imagine. And that was that. And then it was our turn and we did our concert. And then I turned to the audience, I said, we'd now like to present the New Zealand version of Waltzing Matilda. And wondering what on earth it was going to be like. Well, off we did. Well, it brought the house down and we were called back again and had to do it for a second time. So it worked out very well, but it was a great success. And I met up with, the last time I did that with a young chorister, I met him up with him the other day. He's a 27-year-old. And he said, would you like to have another go, Mr. Shroff? And I said, well beyond me now. I think the greatest thrill for us was in 1982, the American Choral Directors Association in America, which is a huge organization with choirs, as you can imagine, everywhere, and some of them of amazingly high standard. We were invited to their Northwest Convention in the state of Washington. And we had to send them a tape of us, see if we were up to acceptable standard. Apparently we were, so we were invited to go there for the 3-day conference. Now we decided, well, if we're going all that way, what else should we do? My wife's sister lived in Vancouver in Canada. So we thought, well, that's a very good place perhaps to start off. So the tour went from New Zealand to Hawaii, with a stop in Hawaii and a concert in Hawaii, then across to Vancouver, 2 concerts in Vancouver, and then down to Walla Walla in the state of Washington. Now, Walla Walla is known for its Walla Walla sweets, which are a variety of onion. It's a small American town. It was chosen as the center for their convention because I think it was Hoover, the millionaire Hoover, had built them a wonderful concert hall for some reason. And so it was held in this little town of Walla Walla, which was great for our boys because they arrived and they found a little town very much like New Zealand towns. And the kids very much living the way that New Zealanders do. One kid said to me, I went and expected to see hot and cold folding doors and everything super duper. He said, it was just like my place. So that was great. The boys had a wonderful time there. We had a wonderful time at the convention. We performed, I think, well, but there were some marvelous other choirs there, school choirs, junior choirs and university choirs. I must say, after one concert, I did a little smile. A young American came up to me and seemed to be most interested about the choir. And we talked for some moments. And then I said, thank you very much for your interest in the choir. She said, oh, I'm not interested in the choir. I just wanted to hear more of your accent. So I hope he got his money's worth of my accent. It was a bit deflating for me, but there you are. We went back to America and did more or less the same trip 8 weeks later, because after Walla Walla, we went to a town called, can I forget the name? Susie, darling, what was the name of the town in America? She's gone. At any rate, it'll come to me in a minute. It's a big city on the far eastern side of the state of Washington. We went there and had a marvelous time there, and they said to us, do come back. So 8 years later, we did go back. But on that first trip to America, when we got to Hawaii, we had to spend the last day. We just had one room in a hotel where all the boys collected. And our plane was to take off at 12 o'clock at night. On the way to the airport at about 9 o'clock, I began to feel very ill. And when I got to the airport, off I went to the toilets and was violently ill, only to hear every single cubicle in the toilet, choir boys being ill. We had a tummy bug. They got us on board the plane, and then there was a decision whether they would fly us to Vancouver or not. By this time, I was feeling fine. Once you're ill, you seem to be fine. Others were looking very seedy. I said to them, sit up straight, and for goodness sake, don't look ill. We mustn't be cancelled, because if we were delayed, it was going to throw everything out. Some officials marched up and down the aisle, and just as they were about to say, you can go, one of the boys was violently ill. And I thought, well, this is the end of it. However, with some talking, they let us go. And when you arrived in Vancouver, the instructions were everyone get off the plane except for that lot from New Zealand. You stay on the plane and the medical people will come and decide what's going to happen. Well, we all went off to the local hospital and were examined. And I think one of the funniest things was, if you listen to these nurses in Canada trying to handle boys giving Maori names as their street names, they spent probably half the time trying to work out these names. It was, by that time, I could see the funny side of it. However, we recovered, and the boys were real troopers, and we went on with that tour. But it was touch and go for a while, and then, of course, the news got back to New Zealand. The headline in a paper in Vancouver was, Hawaii makes New Zealand choir boys sick. And I thought that was an unfortunate headline. And we got back, when it got back to New Zealand, of course, there were quite a lot of worried mums and dads for a while. I really want to stress that, you know, these choir boys are absolutely normal boys in every way. People see them all dressed up looking very angelic, and they're not. They're just typical boys. They love their sport. They love doing all the sorts of boys things the boys do. Some of them are very cheeky. Some of them are rude. Some of them are shy and quiet and sensitive. There's the whole range of them. And it used to make me laugh where, you know, someone would imply, well, it must be, you know, so nice to have these easy boys to work with that never do anything wrong and blah, blah. And I used to say, you get real, I could tell you some very, very funny stories, which I will do now. When we, hope you're still all awake. When we went on tour, we took with us what we called the dipstick. It was a block of wood with literally a old car dipstick in it. And the dipstick award was for the person who that day did the most silly thing. I think I was awarded it at least 50% of the time. Of course, the boys, their idea was to catch somebody out, especially an adult of the party, if they possibly could. And we almost could guarantee the boys that would get the dipstick on the tour. We arrived at Mangakino on the way on the North Island tour, and there was a lodge there. And we were sharing the lodge with the ladies, country women's institute. And they had sort of one half of the accommodation, and we had the other half. Well, at night, after the boys go to bed, we do our usual patrol, make sure they're settling down. And I come to this room, or which I think is this room, that there's some rumpusing going on. And so I flung open the door and said, "Go to sleep at once." On flashed the light, and 4 ladies sat upright in bed and let me have it. "Get out, how dare you?" I backed out with great embarrassment, hugely embarrassed, muttering my apologies. The next morning, when I walked down to the dining room, this whole group of ladies gave me the slow clap. Of course, the boys wanted to know why, and immediately one of the ladies told them a vivid description of what had happened, and out came the dipstick, and I had to graciously accept it. Another occasion, we had a boy in the choir on this particular tour who we had 2 uniforms. We had the typical choir boy uniform of a cassock, which would do the first half of the program in, and in the second half of the program we'd get into our formal blazers. We had a very short interval in between. This boy was forever leaving his first uniform or his second uniform behind, whatever venue we were at. And the choir manager, she went round patiently and picked him up. So after a recital in Queenstown, I said to her, "No, I've had enough of this. Don't give him his uniform back. Keep it." That was his blazer and trouser uniform. I said, "Just keep it." Our next concert was in Dunedin Cathedral. And after the first half, we went tearing downstairs to get changed. And you literally had about 5 minutes. So I was, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Everyone was getting quickly. And this boy was rushing around, looking. Finally, he was just standing there in his singlet and in his underpants. And I said, "Right, line up, we're off, come on." And he was going, but, line up, we're off. And he stood there with his legs crossed, looking absolutely terrified. Of course, I had pity on him then and said, "I think this gentleman needs a uniform." "Ah, I'll never do that again, Mr. Shroff." And he never did. So that was one way of teaching a lesson. Another occasion was, I was very naughty. I deserved the dipstick, not that I got it for this. We'd done a lunchtime concert in Christchurch Cathedral, and we came out, and there was the wizard. So the boys, we want to see the wizard. Yes, I said, "Of course." He was carrying on. And I said to one of the boys, a delightful boy, but cheeky little boy in the choir, I whispered in his ear, "When the wizard stops for breath, why don't you yell out BS at the top of your voice?" He said, "What do you mean BS?" I said, "You know what it stands for." "Oh, all right." So the wizard went on, then he stopped talking, and this boy at the top of his voice yelled, "Bullshit!" And the wizard turned around, his eyes popping out, and he walked, and he said, "Who said that?" And he came closer and closer. This boy went, "Oh, help!" and tore back into the cathedral for sanctuary. I found that very amusing. He said to me afterwards, "I shouldn't have said that, Mr. Shroff, should I?" I said, "No, it just shows you. Think." So those are the funny things that went on to show that there's lots of fun as well as lots of work to achieve the highest standard you possibly could. Trying to teach the boys all the time. There's two sides of your life, the fun side, and then if you really want to get anywhere and do something worthwhile and make a real contribution to society, it needs a lot of hard work. And I think the majority of the boys learned that. They worked extremely hard. They could be 1 minute a bunch of absolutely annoying little creatures, and then to perform and put on a wonderful performance and sing music of very high quality, some of it quite difficult and challenging, just to show that that's how life could be. So without further ado, I'd just like to play one more little piece for you, and I hope it's not too distorted. It's one which I hope some of you music lovers will recognise. And I'd just like to finish up by saying the choir had its 50th anniversary last year, and although I've been away from it for a long time, I was given the task of writing the book. So we've written a book about the choir, because I think for any choir to last 50 years in New Zealand is pretty good, but for a boys' choir that was told it wouldn't work, it is some satisfaction to say, well, there you are. What the future is, who knows? But it's been a great joy to me to have done it, and to show what can be done. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope it hasn't been too much of a bore, and if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to have them.
Neil, it's Deb speaking. I'm curious to know how the choir was funded. You travelled a lot, and I'd like to hear about how you went about your funding.
Yes, indeed. It's one of the major questions. Well, to begin with, initially, the Lions Club gave us some support to get going, get the basics going. And then 3 or 4 years later, when we became independent, it was just, well, we apply for every grant that we can think of that might give us something. And we do a lot of fundraising. We have dinners, we have, my wife was involved, we had a boy in the choir. My wife was involved in endless cake stalls, all sorts of things like that, variety concerts, singing in malls at Christmas time, being sponsored by the business people. So we were in the atrium or somewhere else, or the Royal Oak Mall, some mall at Christmas time. So it was all that. Then we had to start charging the boys the minimum fee to be in the choir, to help cover the costs. So really it was hand to mouth all the time, looking for grants. And then when we had the 25th anniversary of the choir, my wife set up an Auckland Boys Choir trust fund to raise sufficient money to pay for boys who couldn't afford the fees to be in the choir.
Yeah.
And that's still going.
Yeah.
But no, and then when we did major, I mean, you know, the trips to America were hugely expensive.
Yes.
So then it was just massive fundraising, and every boy had his own fundraising system where he was doing things to raise money. And then we were applying for grants. You get very few grants for travel. We found that out very quickly. So we got grants for uniform, for music. Every time we commissioned from a composer, of course, it cost, unless you're a commissioner like Douglas Muse, who said, no, I don't want anything for this, I'm happy to do it. So that's a very good question. The fundraising has always been a constant. And we had wonderful parents and committees who were prepared to work very hard to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, very interesting.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much. I loved music.
Yeah, I'm sorry if it was distorted. It wasn't very good playing it through here.
But
but it's a good record. We didn't make, back in those days, you didn't seem to make any recordings. So I've really only got one very precious one to me, which is a good recording with some good, some of the boys soloists, of course, were wonderful. And there were some that went on to do great things and trained and went overseas and became opera singers. And another one had the most wonderful job managing one of London, I think it was the London Symphony Orchestra, as their manager. So he wasn't singing, he was the manager. So, and others have gone on and done wonderful things with musical instruments. Others haven't at all, but that doesn't matter. Last year when he had, my book was launched, I got many of, we had about 80 old boys come. Of course, and now some of them are middle-aged, which makes me feel particularly ancient. But we had a great reminiscence, and some said, no, I haven't done anything with music, but he said, I still love all that music that you gave us. And he said, I still think about it and I still sing it. And others said, oh, I've joined a local choir. And so, you know, it doesn't matter whether it wasn't designed that you went on to do great things in music. Hopefully just give you a love of music and a way of relaxing and enjoying life. So it's interesting how some went on to do great things in music, others didn't, but still have fond memories of their time in the choir.
Talking about music and other choirs, was the Uncle Tom's Choir still going when the boys' choir started up?
No, it had long gone.
It had.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
yeah. So perhaps that was a good thing. We didn't have opposition.
Different audience, different participants.
Yes. And of course, today it's getting harder and harder because there's so much going on for kids. You know, they're so involved in sports and all sorts of other things going on. And parents are frantically tearing their kids around after school to everything under the sun. It's a changing world, and that makes me wonder whether, you know, a thing like the boys' choir will go on. But there's an Auckland girls' choir, and it's flourishing. It's doing very well.
But when you've got the quality of the Auckland Boys Choir, as you said, you've already completed 50 years, but you keep the quality there, and people tend to keep it going.
Well, yes, that's one good thing about it. If people think it's worthwhile, you know, they'll support it. And one of the greatest joys to me was that the groups like the NZSO and APO and Choral Society thought the boys were good enough to involve them in these major things that needed a boys' choir or a children's choir. That was always a great thrill to me because it's easy to be there and sort of just be mediocre, but it's when others consider, well, you know, this is a great work. And of course, a marvelous experience for the boys. I remember one boy after the War Requiem, which of course, you know, has a massed adult choir, the boys' choir, a symphony orchestra, and then a quartet of other instruments in the town hall. You know, we practice like mad. There's not easy music of Benjamin Britten. And I could see the boys sort of almost getting tired of what's all this. And then I said, you wait for our first rehearsal with everybody. Well, of course, they were just, wow. When they heard the whole orchestra and choir go, whoom, suddenly it all made sense to them. And that's and to me, one of my greatest joy was to look at the faces of these kids when they experienced this for the first time. Anything else?
Neil, where do we find out where you're putting on concerts? We used to go to a few of them and then we lost contact.
Yes, well, unfortunately, after I left, that sort of contacting people and letting know what was going on, I haven't known for years myself when the next boys' choir concert is. They're meant to let me know. I've asked them to let me know, but it's a different organisation now. And I've got, of course, keep right out of it.
Yes.
Tempted as I am not to.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm sorry you don't hear. I'll try and rouse them up again. Of course, during this strange last 2 years, nothing much has been going on at all. They were going to have a 50th anniversary celebration last year and again this year, but of course it's been spoilt by the COVID. So we just have to wait and see whether they do anything in the end.
And have you still got copies of your book for sale?
I'm having a reprint when he's open to do it again. If there's anybody, would you be interested? Sorry?
Yes, sir. Yes, I would be. Just listening to those boys brought back a lot of beautiful memories when our school used to sing in the Wellington Town Hall at the end of the year.
What school was that?
St. Mary's. and
Oh,
we-
yes.
We had a very well-known singer teaching us.
Right. Well, look, I'll you give me your details, and wait a moment. Never lose a chance. Very exciting to make a sale.
Can we put, I was going to say, can we put this through Lee so that she can
Yes.
coordinate?
Yes, put it. That's right. Put it through Lee. Yes.
Yes,
put it
that's
through.
fine. I'm more than happy to take orders for you on behalf.
I don't know when the reprint will be, but I was amazed at how many of the old boys wanted to buy not just one copy, but a couple of copies. So I have to go for a reprint, and I was in the middle of doing that. And so you be patient, and I'd be very happy to. Yeah.
Sure, Neil. You just let me know, and I can pass on the information.
Right. Lovely.
Anybody else have any questions for Neil?
Thank you very much.
Yes, Neil, I found that very fascinating. And I did want to know if the boys did go on afterwards. So thanks for answering that question. And yeah, most
Yes,
fascinating. Thank you for
that-
your time. And yes, all the best.
Well, it's a pleasure, and thank you for listening so patiently.
Oh, it was lovely. No, absolutely lovely.
Really
It was
lovely.
really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Right. Pleasure.
you.
Lovely to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Yes.
Might be seeing you again.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll organize.
Right.
Thank you, Neil.
Neil.
A pleasure.
Bye-bye,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a
Bye-bye.
lovely day.
Thank you.
And you.
Gotta come forward.